Can I give you Sure. Mom,
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa azwajihi wa dhurriyyatihi wa ashabihi wa man walah. Wa ba'du, alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah. It's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we thank Him for all of the for everything that we have in our life. It's very easy to take things for granted when we have them. And then it's very easy to see the value of something when you lose it, or when you don't have it. Or even when something is taken from you, or someone close to you doesn't have something that you wish they had. And this is the case with our Islam. So many of us, we come into the deen, or many of us are born and raised in Islam, and it's very easy to take for granted that, alhamdulillah, we say the name of Allah. But there are many people who have never once said the name of Allah, or they have become Muslim and perhaps their mother has never said the name of Allah, or their father has never made a sajda. And sometimes this is actually one of the most difficult things for people to deal with who embrace Islam. They can handle their own challenges, they can handle their own difficulties. Yes, it comes with sacrifice, but that's what they sign up for. But what becomes really difficult, especially once they start to internalize what Islam is I wish my family had this also. It's human nature that you want what's best for the people that you love. And we know as Muslims that what is best and what is good goes beyond the material world. That we believe in something which is greater than the material world. There's something greater than the physical universe. And there are metaphysical realities that we all yearn for. And in the same way that we use the physical things in order to understand the spiritual things, we want the spiritual things just like we want the material things. That's a part of our nature. So it's again very easy for us as Muslims perhaps to take it for granted. And we always have to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because ultimately it is a blessing from Him. That's why there's a verse in the Quran where Allah Azza wa Jal mentions. And some of the questions, I'm going to try to get to them sooner rather than later, and also allow some of the brothers and sisters present to ask questions and interact, as the objective of this particular gathering is not just a lecture, but an interaction, inshallah. So some of the questions we're asking about me personally, even how I became Muslim, what led you to Islam, and these type of things. And it ties into what I was going to speak about anyways, as a prelude to some of our discussion. And that's a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Alhamdulillahi alladhi hadana lihada, wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. That all praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has guided us. And had it not been for the guidance of Allah, we would not be guided. This is one of the things that some of the commentators mention. A believer, when they enter into paradise, this is going to come involuntarily from their tongue. They're going to immediately praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what they have been given. They're not going to make it and say, I'm so happy I did good deeds. I'm so happy I prayed. I'm so happy I fasted. I knew I made the right decision when I decided to go to the masjid. I knew I made the right decision. They're not going to say these things. They're not going to start thinking about themselves. They're going to acknowledge Allah. This is one of the most important things when it comes to our faith, is seeing Allah in whatever good that we have. And recognizing Allah's blessing in whatever good that we have. So even when people ask, what was the sabab or the cause for you to become a Muslim, I can't help but first tell them and make it a point to share this verse. That first and foremost, it was Allah. And whether a person embraces Islam as a convert, who was here for the khutbah today? I should say who wasn't here maybe, perhaps. Who wasn't here for the khutbah? Read somewhere else maybe. We spoke about this a little bit, maybe we'll get to it again, but we already clarified this term of a convert versus a revert. Right? So sometimes people insist that you have to say that you reverted to Islam, right? But it's not a point that needs to be focused on. If someone prefers convert or revert, that's something which is more personal preference than anything. But what we shouldn't do is try to correct people. It gets a little bothersome also, even as a convert sometimes when you tell people I converted to Islam and X, Y, and Z, and they're like, brother, don't you mean that you reverted, right? And it's like, well, actually no, I meant exactly what I said, which is that I converted, right? And it's neither here nor there. Whatever a person prefers, it's okay. Because Allah created us on the fitrah, as we discussed. We were born in our natural disposition and our primordial state. But He didn't say yuladu ala Islam. He didn't say they're born as a Muslim. Now we know that the natural state is to submit to Allah in the generic sense, but the formal religion of Islam is something that you accept as you become an older, mukallaf, responsible and liable human being. Alright? So then if a person never had that, and they never made that choice to be a Muslim, and they were raised as something else, then when they become a Muslim, they're not reverting because they never practiced Islam. They never had a concept of it, other than their natural state, which everyone has. And if you want to look at it like that, as I mentioned during the khutbah, even non-Muslims are technically Muslim because they all submit to Allah. Everything in the creation submits to Allah, in the natural or in the generic sense. So when people ask, what caused you to embrace Islam, I can't help but share this verse first and foremost. There are things that happened, but you'll look in the life of people, and even when I look in the immediate circle of my own friends, some of whom I was learning Islam with, some of them didn't become Muslim. And we all went through the same experience. We got exposed to the same things. So if I were to say, well, I met a friend who was a Muslim, and he started telling about Islam, and it made a lot of sense. Well, I had friends who were in those same circles, having those same conversations about how Islam was so amazing, but decided not to become a Muslim. So then you have to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately beyond our own outward decisions and actions, because it's guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. So this verse again, Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana lihada wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah, that we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. And this is what people will say when they go into paradise. They're going to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is contrary to the people who hellfire will begin with. So when you look at the three people that the Prophet ﷺ mentions that the hellfire will begin with, who were they? It was the martyr, the one who died in the, supposedly fighting in the way of Allah, a person who was generous, a philanthropist, who gave a lot of their wealth in charity to build schools and masajid and things like this, and then a scholar who learned the deen and taught people deen. So when they're asked, what did you do with the blessings that I gave you? Allah is reminding them that they were my blessings, right? The first thing that they say, Ana, I did this and I did that. What did you do with the strength? I went and fought in your way. What did you do with your wealth? I went and spent it for your, to build good things. What did you do with your knowledge? What did you do with your mind and your intellect? They say I. And they fail to acknowledge that it was Allah. And that's a big red flag. So the believer is to be very humble, even in this journey of embracing Islam and being Muslim. So whether again you convert to Islam or you're born and raised in a Muslim family, whatever that was, it was from Allah. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. title and theme of this particular session is how we can make Ramadan easy. How we can make Ramadan easy for people who embrace Islam, for new Muslims, converts, reverts, whatever we want to call them. It is something which is quite challenging. Maybe many of you have heard stories with people who embrace Islam and they talk about breaking fast by themselves. Right? So they might have a long day of work, staying hungry, and then they go home, mashallah, and it's pin drop silence. So either they may be living with other family members who are kind of doing their own thing, but they're not really interested in Ramadan. There's people who are young adults who are now living on their own, who have perhaps not gotten married yet. There's a number of people like this who become Muslim, literally sitting at home in their apartment, alone. And it's time to break fast. And mashallah, they're just, alhamdulillah, they're grateful and with their peanut butter and jelly sandwich, whatever it may be, and they're just breaking their fast by themselves. So trying to establish some type of community is important. Having something even maybe at the masjid. And when we say something at the masjid, it doesn't mean that the imam should do it. We have to support the imam because the imam is someone who has so many things on his plate. And then he's probably the one who's going to be leading Taraweeh also. So it's not that, when we talk about we need to do things in our community, we're talking about ourselves. And then the imam can help kind of facilitate those things and guide us on those things. But as I'm sure you all have in this beautiful community, mashallah, you need things like subcommittees and committees and subcommittees where people are able to assist, to take care of things that need to be done. Whether it's assigning a big brother or a big sister to someone who embraces Islam, or having someone volunteer to bring food on a particular day. Because it's also hard, we know, in Ramadan, you have your family to cook for, you have your family to be with, you want to be able to break fast with your family, and it's not always practical to bring them to the masjid to do that. So it's not practical for any one person to be expected now to accommodate every single iftar at the masjid. Whether it's done every day or once a week or every other week or 3 times a week or on the weekend, whatever frequency that might be done as an iftar and a dinner at the masjid, there should be different people who are overseeing it. There should be different people who are involved in it. And that will allow that would allow the community to be accessible to people who don't have community. There are a few other questions that were asked. One of them was about, again, embracing Islam, and perhaps this will help us even relate to other converts who embrace Islam and have to now transition to a new way of life. The question is, how come being a Muslim is more difficult than being a part of other religions? And how can we combat that in our personal lives? Right? Meaning, why is Islam so hard? Or why can it feel like it's so hard compared to other religions? Well, for one, if we're comparing what we do to another religion who practically doesn't do anything, then it seems like a lot. So a person, for example, in our faith, as Muslims, we pray 5 times a day. If someone is now comparing what we do as Muslims, praying 5 times a day, to a particular faith group that doesn't pray at all, it's going to feel like we have to do a lot, because we're comparing it to nothing. But if you compare it to actually when the prayer was prescribed, the prayer was prescribed actually as 50 prayers. And the Prophet ﷺ was told by the Prophet Musa ﷺ to go back and ask your Lord to make it less. Ask your Lord to make it less. And we know the story, mashallah, of the Mi'raj, and how the prayer was lessened by 5 prayers, from 50 to 45, to 40, 35, 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5, until it was down to 5 prayers. And when the Prophet ﷺ again went to Musa and saw Musa in the sixth sky on his way down. Musa alayhi salam asked him, "What'd you get?" He said, "It's now 5 prayers." And Musa alayhi salam even told him, in this case, go back, it's too much. Go back, I have experience, people aren't going to want to do it. They're not going to want to stick to it. We know that the Prophet ﷺ felt embarrassed. He said, how can I go back now? It's been less than 5 prayers each time. If I go back now, I'm not going to be left with anything. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that if we do these 5 prayers, anyone in my ummah who adheres to these 5 prayers, they will get the reward as if they performed 50. So when we look at it from that perspective, not from 5 verses not praying, but from 5 to 50, now it becomes a lot more manageable. It becomes something a lot more reachable for ourselves. Because from Allah's mercy, He could have told us to pray 50, but He lessened it to 5 and said, I'll still give you the reward for 50. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to, it was His prerogative that He could have told us, pray 500 times a day. And it would have been fair. It would have absolutely been fair. If we were commanded to pray for our entire life and do nothing except for eat, and you have to just pray until you die, that would have been fair. It would have been reasonable for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His mercy, He lessened it to 5. So the 5 actually isn't something to be overwhelmed, right? If you want to compare, why is our religion so much? I think most of the time it comes down to the prayer and fasting in Ramadan, and then maybe wearing the hijab for sisters. If you compare it to nothing, then it seems like a lot. But if you compare it to what is actually, what it could have been, then it seems much more manageable, number 1. Number 2, there actually are other faith groups that have to do, where certain people actually do much more than what we do. There are other faith groups, and at the very least, maybe people within certain faith groups, where they're expected to do much more than even what we do. So they may have to live in a monastery. They may have to worship as monks. They may have to be in a convent, right, and never get married. They may have to do these type of things. We're not expected to do that. So when it comes down to it, if you look at our lifestyle and our practices as Muslims, it shouldn't be viewed as something difficult. Why do Muslims, right, as the question was asked, why do Muslims, or why is our religion so hard and so difficult compared to other faiths? I would contest that it's not difficult. It's all about perspective. If anything, it is balanced, because you can't not do anything, right? We also know that it's not reasonable, and it's just a part of our nafs, or kind of the lower self, that we would feel like, you know what, we should just not do anything. Yeah, not doing anything would be nice, like in a fantasy world, where we don't have to do anything and you get everything you want. But we also know that Islam is in a fantasy world. It's not a fantasy. It's not a fantasy way of life. There needs to be something that we're supposed to do. And then in the bigger scheme of things, it actually helps us become better individuals. Right? So the deen, although we do it so that we can worship Allah, we don't do it for our self-interests. Everything in our deen, we do it for the sake of Allah, not for our self-interests. But if we actually do it, it's in our self-interest to do it. That's one of the, again, kind of the beautiful things of our faith, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He made it in a way where it's actually good for us. Because then, again, He could have had us do things that were actually just because He said so. And there's no benefit, there's no utility in it at all for us. But when you look at things like the prayer, and you look at things like fasting, as Maulana Asfar had read in the prayer today, the fasting itself was prescribed so that we can have taqwa. These type of things, when you fast and when you pray, it establishes a very important discipline that the human being needs in life. And that's why when we teach our children also from a very young age that prayer is important, and then they stick to their prayer, as difficult as it may be. What you're doing, if we do it the right way, it's not just go pray because I said so, but trying to also supplement the the expectation for them to pray with an understanding of why they pray, with an appreciation of why they pray. And then when they're able to have that, it actually instills a very beautiful discipline in them that now it carries over to everything else in their life. They start to understand that, okay, if something's important, I have to make time for it. My religion is important. I have to make time for it. Fasting. There are certain times and places and things that I'm not supposed to do, even if I want to do it. So when you're hungry, we don't eat. When we're hungry, we don't eat if we're fasting. Why? Are we just trying to punish ourselves? Of course, that's not the case. What we're trying to do is establish a discipline that sometimes I need to exercise self-restraint. That I can't just do whatever I want, whenever I want, however I want, to whoever I want, in whatever fashion that I want. But there are limits and expectations that I'm supposed to actually follow. And then this carries over in everything in life, and we learn that when we fast. Now again, you won't necessarily find in the Quran how it says, "Oh, you who believe, fasting was prescribed on you so that you can be disciplined and not say things when you don't like it." It says fasting was prescribed on you لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that perhaps you will have taqwa. And this is again the beauty of the Quran, which is it doesn't have to tell you all of those things. But the person who then understands and reflects on the meaning of the Quran, which we're supposed to do, they're able to now deduce these principles from these verses and then apply it to their life. Because at the end of the day, what is taqwa? Taqwa is to have consciousness of Allah. It's to be aware of Allah. That Allah sees me. Taqwa are like the brakes that you're supposed to apply when you're tempted to do something you're not supposed to. If you get a little technical, it's actually not the part of you that will motivate you to do what you're supposed to do good deeds. It's the part of you that will motivate you to refrain from those things which you're not supposed to do. The part of you and the part of our faith which actually motivates us to do what we're supposed to do is what's called birr, piety and righteousness. But the taqwa is what helps us apply self-restraint. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in another part of the Quran that, ta'awanu alal birri wa taqwa. Help each other, mutually assist one another in birr and taqwa, in piety and in God consciousness. These are the two parts of our faith which we need in order to do what we're supposed to and refrain from that which we're not supposed to do. So fasting instills that in us. Because we know life is more than about just not doing haram things. We also know that life is about not doing things even if it's convenient for me, if I'm inconveniencing others. So I'm not going to park, mashallah, right in front of the masjid because it's easier for me during Jumu'ah if I'm double parking and blocking people. None of us do that here, mashallah. Allahu Akbar. And we have a lot of parking spaces, right? Even then, we know we're tempted. All these beautiful parking spaces, but they seem so far away. MashaAllah. So we pull up to the curb. Right? It's just going to go in really quick. It'll be really fast. MashaAllah, right? These are all things where yes, I would love to do that, but fasting, taqwa, this discipline trains us that I'm not going to do whatever I want whenever I want. So in the same way, as a teenager especially, when it's 5:45 p.m. and it's the Asr time, and your mouth is parched, and there's a cold Gatorade in the refrigerator, and no one else is home, you're not going to drink it. Because you're I know I'm not supposed to do that. Yes, my mom doesn't see, my father doesn't see, but Allah sees. So as much as I would like to do that, I'm not going to do that. Maybe when you were younger you did. Right? I know some of you, mashallah, sneaking into the fridge as 10 and 11-year-olds and eating a little something. Right? But at some point we grow up. At some point we grow up and then we don't do those things. These are all we don't do it for our self-interest. But if we practice Islam correctly, it's actually in our self-interest. So to answer the question without, again, trying to make it too long, I won't be as long-winded, inshallah, with some of the other questions. Our faith, our religion is not difficult. This is one of the one of the meanings that dinu yus, as the Prophet ﷺ says, that our faith is actually easy. It's not telling us to do insurmountable things that are like impossible. It's just telling us like we do have to do something. Now, this is something when it comes to helping some of the converts in our community have and experience a better Ramadan. We have to meet certain people where they're at, especially converts. MashaAllah, there was 2 people who took Shahada today, a brother and a sister. And right in time for Ramadan, mashallah, right? Right on time for them to start fasting. If they're capable and ready to fast, then alhamdulillah, they can fast. But the last thing we need to do is to tell them, okay, now you're a Muslim, you need to fast. This is something where you'll find many people who embrace Islam, they actually want to voluntarily fast. But I know a lot of people who do become Muslim, and they became Muslim, you know why? They became Muslim because they believed it to be the truth. It made sense to them. They don't know exactly what they're signing up for right off the bat. So we have to be careful when someone becomes a Muslim to bombard them or overwhelm them with do's and don'ts. Even when they're coming to the masjid, let's say they are fasting, it's Ramadan, and they want to try to they want to be experienced, and they want to be a part of it, and they want to experience Ramadan. Quite commonly, you'll sit with a brother or a sister, and you're going to start hearing things about them. And they're going to tell you about their day. And they're going to tell you about, right? We have a pretty mature crowd here. They may tell you about, without going into details, certain things that happened in their day that are just not allowed, that are haram. It's not our place at that moment to start telling them, actually, brother, that's haram. Or, sister, now that you become a Muslim, it's actually, you're not supposed to do that, and you should stop doing that. This is something that happens commonly also. People who embrace Islam, all of a sudden we see them almost like our own personal experiment, where we can maybe live vicariously through them and help them do the things that maybe we weren't able to do, or focus on things that we do, and we focus only on those things, right, when it comes to telling them what they need to do. We know that there's a lot of things as Muslims that we don't do, but for some reason, the things that we do actually do, or refrain from, we hold people to that standard. And we can't necessarily make sense of why they don't do something that we do. They may be doing things, right, that are good that we don't do. Right? So it does kind of balance out. And this is in general too with our own Muslim community. We can be judgmental at times where we look at what people don't do if they're things that we do. But we don't focus on the things that we don't do when other people aren't doing it because we don't do it. If that kind of makes sense. We have to allow people to be where they're at, especially for people who embrace Islam, taking it back to that. So there may be a convert, a person who comes to the masjid, and he may be wearing something. She may be wearing something. Just maybe last month, we do a new Muslim class also where in my community where I'm at. And we also have an after-school maktab program for late elementary and middle school students. So the maktab class, Islamic studies for youngsters, was getting dismissed as we were getting ready to start the convert class or the new Muslim class. And lo and behold, there was a brother who had just embraced Islam a few weeks ago. Tatted up on his face, piercings on his face, everything. He sat right in the very front. And we're getting ready to start the class, we're having a good conversation, and one of the maktab kids comes up to him very innocently and was like, brother, tattoos are haram, right? Tattoos are haram. And then I just smiled and looked at him and I was like, go home, go home. I said, go home, right? And then we had a nice laugh, right? Because, yes, we're not supposed to get tattoos. He got all of those tattoos before he was even a Muslim. So yes, maybe that was excused, but he still had his piercings. Now, what are you supposed to do at that point? Someone's coming to the masjid, and he has piercings on, a man. So, at that point, that's not the time to tell him that piercings are haram. And you have to take it off. Because you know why he became Muslim? He became Muslim because what he heard was true. And he wanted to now embrace that because it made sense. He didn't become Muslim so he can take off his piercings. He didn't become Muslim so he can break up with his girlfriend. He didn't become Muslim so he can actually stop his substance abuse or stop listening to music. That's not why people become Muslim. So what happens is we start telling them all of these things, like you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, you're not supposed to do that, you're not supposed to do this. And then the person who now became Muslim because of what they believed and knew to be the truth, they confuse their inability to practice with their inability to be a Muslim. So then they leave Islam. So in many cases, a lot of people I'll meet, at some point they're like, man, I just couldn't do it, I'm not Muslim anymore. Like, what happened? Tell me what was it about? And they may say something, let's just say for example, I couldn't make the prayers. Right? So you see the problem there, right? What's the problem here? Is a person's inability to pray, does that remove them from the folds of Islam? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If a person rejects the prayer and says, prayer is not important, that was like for the old days when people actually needed to pray. But as long as you're practicing Islam, you're a good person, you don't have to pray. That's unacceptable. But we have to believe that we are supposed to pray, and if we're not praying, then we have to try to be better at some point. But you can't conflate the two. A person's inability to practice should not be confused with their inability to be a Muslim. We're very, very quick. A sister becomes a Muslim, and she's married. What's the first thing that comes into our mind? Sister, your marriage is no longer valid. It's haram to be married to a non-Muslim man. You should tell him to come to the masjid, we'll give him the shahada, and then what happens if he doesn't take the shahada? What happens if he himself is not ready? In many cases, I've seen it firsthand, we're telling the sister that it's haram. You can't be in that marriage, we can help you, we can support you, we can do X, Y, and Z to help you get out of that situation. These are very, very serious things and challenges that we have in ourselves, thought through before we actually mention it to him. So this is a whole other kind of discussion and topic to have. But the point here is, in Ramadan, if we really want to make it easier for people who embrace Islam, create a wholesome environment where they will feel like they can actually come and just be in good company. They can attend and they can break fast and they can experience what it means to be a believer without necessarily now trying to fix their life. That will happen with time. That will happen organically. So I'm also not saying that, they're a new Muslim, they don't have to do those things. I'm not saying that those things are allowed for them. We're not talking about that. We're talking about letting people come at their pace and using wisdom. Ud'u ila rabbika, ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'idati al hasana. We know this. Allah commanded the Prophet ﷺ that, call to the way of Allah with wisdom and kind words. Right? Question?
Yeah, is that okay?
تفضل.
So if you don't mind, we'll have part A and part B. So are there any exceptions to that? Because sometimes you also have this fear that you'll be asked, why did you not guide that person when you saw them doing something wrong? So are there things that you would say, you know what, if it's in those categories, you should actually correct it? And part B, when does that transition period end? When do you start to consider, okay, you've been in it enough, now you should start correcting these things?
MashaAllah, very good questions. The first is a two-part question. Part A was, sometimes we feel like we're liable. When are we supposed to say something? Are there certain things where we shouldn't just let it go because we may be accountable for not telling them and enjoining them to do what was right? And the second part of the question, that what is that kind of grace period where you allow a person to transition so that they can start leaving certain things, right? As for the first part of the question, and Jazakumullah khair for asking this, because sometimes it's me personally, I might say something and focus on one side of it, but there's always two sides. And as a principle, remember that Islam is balanced, and there's always two extremes. And if you try to find the middle ground or the happy medium between the two extremes, that's usually what you're gonna find to be what is right. So I was talking about how you're not supposed to rush a person into doing what they're supposed to. So that doesn't mean you should never tell them what they're supposed to do. There will be times when that person who is a new Muslim is actually motivated and wants to do certain things, right? What I would also do is, if you really want to be a positive influence and be able to tell them what is right and wrong, is establish a relationship with them. Because what I think is inappropriate is not knowing the person at all. And you might even think to yourself, well, this might be the only chance I get, and I might be accountable for this. I may never see him again, so I better tell him now. I don't think that's appropriate. Rarely is that appropriate. Because it's almost selfish to think that, well, this might be the only time I may never see this person again, and I might be accountable for it. So I better tell them what they need to do. Only thinking about how I'm impacted by this dynamic, instead of thinking about how that person might be impacted in that dynamic. So there's going to be a happy medium. If you really want to now not be accountable for something pretty serious that you think you should help them with, establish a relationship with them. Get to know them well enough to where now you can start to tell them little things at a time. And as far as what that grace period is, that grace period, it's different for different people. There is a level of relativity when it comes to how we'll be judged. We know this as Muslims. So a person who was like a convert is not going to be judged the same, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best, as someone who was born and raised in a generation of scholars. It's just not the same. We know this about the companions themselves, who were in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ. They didn't have this concept of like mustahab and nafil and sunnah and fard. If the Prophet ﷺ told them to do that, they did it. Because after ascertaining that the Prophet ﷺ directly told them to do something, for them it wasn't a matter of like, okay, is it fard? Is it like sunnah mu'akkada? Is it obligatory or is it strongly emphasized? They said the Prophet ﷺ told them, I'm not going to leave it. They were held to a higher standard. We know also that what that grace period is, that the Quran was revealed over the period of 23 years. So for the first 13 years in Mecca Mukarramah, there were very little prohibitions, if any. Right? Apart from like the basic things of like don't kill someone, which were already there. Like universal values. But things like alcohol. People were drinking even in Medina Munawwara. We know this also. And when the command for the prohibition of alcohol came, Sayyidatuna Aisha radiallahu anha mentions that the streets of Medina became like streams of wine. What did that mean? That means that the Muslims had wine in their homes. And it wasn't for a decoration. So these are all things where we have to understand that there needs to be some type of a grace period. And there's no blanket statement to say it's going to be this much or this long. I know Muslims in my own life who, from the moment they took the Shahada, they never missed a prayer. And I know Muslims who've been Muslim for 20 years and they still don't pray 5 times a day. Now, it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it okay. Like the prayer is obligatory. But their faith is more obligatory than their prayer. And you have to be able to make sure that we help people reach what their end goal is. And that's something which, again, Allah help us all have the wisdom to do that. I don't claim to know that and have that ultimate wisdom. Nor is there a blanket statement that can be given that it's this long until they're supposed to actually do it. All we do know is that it requires wisdom, and that varies from person to person. And if we really care about people, establish a relationship with them and get to know them so that you can properly advise them, inshallah. Any other questions from the sisters also? Brothers, sisters?
Is it appropriate for the converts to tell us the stories that they had heard in their previous life and they can continue with those, or we should absolutely ask them not?
Stories about their past life? Like
stories about prophets that they had heard.
Oh, I see.
Sayyidina Musa, Sayyidina Isa, Sayyidina Sulaiman, Yusuf, you name it.
Well, the Prophet ﷺ did say, that you can narrate from the Jews and the Christians, وَلَا حَرَجْ, but وَلَكَنْ لَا تُكَذِّبُهُمْ وَلَا تُصَدِّقُهُمْ, but you should take it with a grain of salt, as they say, right? You can't absolutely believe in it, nor should you absolutely reject these stories that you hear from the other traditions, namely the people of the book, the Jews and Christians, about prophets in our tradition. So if there's a story about a prophet from their tradition which doesn't conflict with our principles and values, but it's not established in our deen either, then you can hear it. But if it openly contradicts with something, then we know that we actually will 100% reject it. And if it's consistent with something that's in our own teachings, then we can accept it. So there's nothing wrong with hearing about it, especially if it's for the sake of helping them understand maybe what was accurate, what was inaccurate. I don't see an issue with that, Allahu A'lam. And at any point, please call out the questions. I don't, because I might not see your hand again, and brothers in the back, I might not see your hand. Sisters upstairs, I might not see your hand. So just call out the question at any point, even if I'm speaking, inshallah. Yeah, there's a sister up there. Oh, brother? Yes.
So if you see anyone, correcting someone inappropriately, so how should you start?
So if you see someone correcting someone inappropriately, right? So we're going to correct the person who's correcting, right? Yeah, this is a good point. So it's when it comes to correcting, right? If they're people that you can be a little bit more open. If they're strangers, then it's hard to just be so bold, emboldened to just correct people without knowing anything about that person. Get to know them first. Say salam first. I've had people even come up to me before and start correcting something about something I did before even saying assalamu alaikum. At least start with that much, right? But if it's someone you know who's correcting someone and they're from the masjid, then I think you should tell that person. And if they're a local person, even if you don't know them well, right? One thing I say is, I try to be a very tolerant person, but one thing I'm very intolerant to is intolerance. So that if someone's extremely intolerant, I won't tolerate it either, because you're empowering it. So then people who are correcting others very kindly, you don't have to be rude about it, but you should let them know, I think, that, brother, we should give them time. This person is a new Muslim, is a convert, and we should give them time before we start bombarding them with these things. You should tell them, yes. Brother? Yeah.
How do you remember that your actions stay with Allah's will?
How do you remember that your actions stay with Allah's will?
How do you remember to do what the Quran tells you to do, not just listen to it?
How do you remember to do what the Quran is telling you what to do as opposed to just listening to it?
Yes.
MashaAllah. I would say that much of what we're commanded to actually do are not things that we have to 24 hours a day be on top of things, right? We are commanded to try to remember Allah all the time. And then there are certain things like when you walk into the masjid, step in with your right foot. When you eat with your right hand. I would say you take these things one step at a time, learn one thing at a time. And then once you develop that, the best way to learn all of those things which we're supposed to try to remember to be doing is to actually do it. But do it one at a time. And then they become a habit where it almost becomes impossible to walk into the masjid with your left foot because it's now a habit. Or leaving the masjid with your left foot, not your right foot. Right? We're supposed to exit the masjid with the left foot. How do we now remember to do that? It's like seems like there's so much to do, right? By actually doing it and making it a habit, not by trying to memorize a list of sunnahs. Okay, eat with the right hand, enter masjid with the right foot, exit with the left foot. Say Bismillah tawakkaltu ala Allah when I leave my house. Say Bismillah wa Bismillah kharaja when I enter my house. Right? It's not by going through a list of things and trying to remember it. It's learning them and actually implementing them one at a time. Yeah.
Is being a Muslim a lifelong journey, or is there a point in my life where I'll be able to say, no, that I'm a Muslim?
Allahu Akbar. So being a Muslim is absolutely a lifelong journey. Absolutely a lifelong journey. So we're a Muslim the moment you say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. A person is a Muslim. It's our belief first and foremost that brings a person into the folds. And then we're constantly trying to refine ourselves and improve ourselves. That's lifelong. The process of trying to improve ourselves, that's absolutely lifelong. From the cradle to the grave. No problem. Yeah.
There are several people here. This will be their first Ramadan being a new Muslim.
Yeah.
Any tips for them on how they can get closer to the Quran in the month of the Quran?
Well done, mashallah. So there's any tips for some of the brothers, sisters who are here that this may be their first Ramadan? And how can they, any tips on how to get closer to the Quran? There were questions also sent in the document about, how can they maximize their benefit from the Quran? Should they listen to recordings if they don't know Arabic and these type of things? Connecting with the Quran, right? The Quran is both lafz wal ma'na. It's words and meaning both. So if a person doesn't understand Arabic, I always advise them that you should regularly read Arabic, or rather you should regularly read the Quran in whatever language is your mother tongue. So you should have a solid English, right, rendition of the meanings of the Quran. Have those meanings in Urdu, in Somali, in Spanish, in Tagalog, in whatever language is a person's mother tongue. And you should regularly read from those meanings in the same way you regularly read from the Arabic, if you're able to read Arabic. Because we have to connect with the meanings. So I would set, right, to answer the question, practically speaking, a regular amount of time to open up the Quran every single day. Every single day. And I would also advise that you should have a bookmarker in the book that you're reading, and you begin reading from the beginning to the end. Now, you have a regimen where you're going to read from cover to cover, and then you can also have, at any point you can open the Quran anywhere you want and read, and it'll still make sense, and there will be ways to connect. That's also good to do. Right? So having multiple readings. So it might be like, okay, I'm going to be reading from cover to cover, but at the same time, I feel like reading Surah Maryam. I want to know about the chapter of the Virgin Mary. So then you start reading that. You might not finish. So you have two bookmarkers going on. And then at the same time, you might be like, you know what? I also want to read about, the chapters that I'm learning in the Quran. So you can also have another kind of bookmarker where you're reading from another part of the Quran. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he was famous for having multiple different readings of the Quran. So he would have his regular regimen where he finishes like from cover to cover once every 7 days or so. He'd read like what's called like the manzil and finish once a week, a whole khatam. But he'd have another reading where he reads a little more slower with reflection, where he finishes like once a month. And then he had another separate reading where he would read just a little bit, where he would finish once a year. And then he had another personal reading where he would reflect more deeply. And he said, if I ever get through the Quran with this reading in my life, it'll be a ghanima. It'll be like spoils of war, like it'll be a celebration if I ever get. He'll read one word and just reflect on it and close it. And the next day another word and just reflect on the word. So there's different readings that you can have like this. So when it comes to connecting to the Quran, we should read with meaning. So we should know the meanings, right? That would be for the people this is their first Ramadan, right? Allah mentions in the Quran about Ramadan. What makes Ramadan so special is not that we fast. What makes Ramadan special is the Quran. So when you hear the verses in the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the word Ramadan, the only time Allah mentions Ramadan in the Quran, correct? One time. And how does He introduce and describe Ramadan? شهر رمضان الذي تصومون فيه. Right now it's like أنزل فيه القرآن. It's the month of Ramadan in which the Quran was revealed. This is what makes it a blessing. Not that we fast. Because this month is so blessed, and the Quran was revealed in this month, because it has so many blessings, our deeds became multiplied. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this the month of fasting so that we can do more good deeds. There was another question. This is Allah's mercy. He could have had us fast in another month where the blessings aren't as great. But He said that month when I'm going to make all of you fast and do more good deeds and pray Taraweeh, it's going to be in the month when the doors of paradise are open and the gates of hellfire are closed. And everything will be multiplied because this is a blessed month in which the Quran was revealed. So what makes the month of Ramadan special is the Quran. So while we will be fasting and doing those things, mashallah, it is important to connect with the Quran. Connect with the Quran, inshallah, by reading it.
Is there a specific translation that you would recommend from experience, or a book also for newer Muslims, because there are so many, it's hard to know.
So the question is regarding a specific translation of the English meanings of the Quran. Jazakallah khair for the water. I was refusing at first, but subhanAllah, it came in clutch, mashallah. Very helpful.
Finish it back, you
سقاك الله إن شاء الله ماء الجنة وماء زمزم في الجنة في الحرمين وماء الكوثر إن شاء الله. So the question about a preferred translation in English, the one that I personally prefer is the one by Dr. Zaki Ahmed Hamad, The Glorious Quran. It's a good translation, mashallah. It's a good rendition into English. Mufti Taqi also has a translation with some commentary as well, which is very helpful. Sheikh Nuh also came out with a translation just within the past few months as well that's worth looking into. And I'm sure that, mashallah, it's something very good. Anything, mashallah, he touches becomes very, very, very accepted, mashallah. So those would be the three I would say off the top of my head. Was there another hand up? Yeah.
Can I read this from the Quran real quick?
Yeah, Bismillah.
It's a short passage. It says, "Say, short is the enjoyment of this world. The hereafter is the best for those who do right. Never will ye be dealt with unjustly in the very least." I just want to say, I love the Quran. I bought this in 2021. This Quran has English, Arabic, and Urdu. I love this.
Alhamdulillah. May Allah put the love of the Quran in all of our hearts, and may Allah love you like you love His book. This is a blessing, and it'll never cease to amaze you. That's one of the things about the Quran is that it's even better than the first day you opened it. Right? So this is a tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's divine facilitation and blessings from Him that He allows someone to read His book. Right? Because if you know how hard it is, how difficult it can be sometimes to get an appointment with someone busy or someone important. Every time you open that book, it's Allah inviting you to have a conversation with Him. And it's Allah speaking to you. So this is why it's a very important gauge that if you really, really want to know how much you love Allah, ask yourself, how much do I like it when Allah speaks to me? And so this is something that we have to try to increase. And if we are lacking in that, it's not to discourage ourselves, but let that be like, okay, I have to improve this part of my practice, and I have to improve this part of my commitment. And I'm going to make a time to read. And as a tip, even for the new, mashallah, converts here, because you're supposed to have wudu when you read the Quran, and you should still even have it if you're reading a translation. You should still have wudu even if it's a translation of the meanings of the Quran. It's not the same, of course, as the Mus'haf, but you still should have wudu out of respect. Keep the Quran in the area of your home where you most commonly make your prayers. And for those of us who read the Mus'haf, you should keep the Mus'haf. First of all, we should have an area in our home where we pray regularly, right? Because we can't always make it to the masjid. And sometimes we pray nafil and nawafil. So there should be an area that we have designated where we actually pray. And in that area, we should keep a shelf or some type of a stand where we have the Mus'haf and the Quran that we can easily now read right after we're done praying. Because after you pray, you're already in a state of wudu. You're already in a state of kind of spiritually cleansed, right? Whereas in other cases, when it's time for bed, you're like, man, I haven't read Quran today. And you're like, now I gotta go to the bathroom, I gotta go make wudu, I'm kind of tired, and then there's so many more hurdles. But if you can put it by the area where you pray, you've removed those hurdles. So it'll help facilitate the reading of that, because we really should be picking up the Quran every single day. And that would be something for the people, for the converts who this will be your first Ramadan. Try to connect with the Quran as much as you can, inshallah. Questions from the sisters upstairs at all? Yes. Alaikum salam.
In this country where majority of the people are non-Muslims, what advice do you would give as a convert to people, how we can invite the non-Muslims toward Islam?
Right, this is a good question. It was actually asked also in this document. What's a good way that we can try to invite and encourage people to come into Islam living in this country? Many, if not most of our neighbors, co-workers, classmates are not Muslim. I would say this: da'wah and invitation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just through words. It's first and foremost through our practice. If you want to give da'wah effectively, the best way that we can give da'wah is by practicing Islam, is by living our life as Muslims, right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, right, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, whose words can be better than the one who calls towards Allah and does good deeds. So it's showing you the aspects of invitation to Allah, that it's through words, it's through actions. وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ, and he says that I'm from those who are Muslims. There's no arrogance here. Right? وَإِنَّنِي مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ or مِنَ الْأَوْلِيَاءِ. I'm not from the... They're not claiming anything more than just being a Muslim. I'm a simple Muslim. This is humility. This is good character. So through your words and through your action and through your character. So if a person really wants to show the beauty of Islam and be a source of da'wah and invitation, it's first and foremost through the practice. And I'll share a personal experience even with the person who was a source of myself becoming a Muslim. Right? There was a person that we were going to school with. I was a freshman at the university, and there was a person who became, who started hanging out with our inner circle of friends. He was from a different city. He was now going to school at San Diego State with us, and he had an apartment, so he didn't really have his own friends, so he became close with us. But there was something different about this person. He had a very clean lifestyle, very good character. He had a clean mouth. He didn't curse. He was always saying things like that. Very respectable. Very intelligent also. Not someone who was indecent. And, you know, at that age, you like to try to philosophize about life. You know, what's the purpose of life? And you try to get deep with each other when you're with your friends, sitting in the garage or sitting around at the coffee shop. You get too deep for your own good sometimes, drowning in your own depth. Right? Everyone thinks they have the answers to life, mashallah. Because at that age, you're maturing intellectually, you become more curious. So we started questioning things about religion. We started questioning things about faith. We started questioning things about God. It was just something I think that happens more than we realize. Amongst people, amongst non-Muslims. So one day when we were having these conversations, he started saying some very impressive things. And he started saying things that we had never heard before, about angels, and you know, about how preparing for death is important because when you go into the grave, you're going to be approached by angels. Like, what is this guy talking about? And it kind of clicked to us that this person wasn't Catholic, he wasn't Christian. So one of my friends asked him, what denomination are you? You're not Catholic, are you? He's like, no. So they asked, what religion are you? He said, I'm a Muslim. And it was very surprising to us. And I'm a Filipino. This person was a Filipino American also. He had been Muslim for about 2 years. He started hanging out with our friends, and we still didn't even know he was Muslim at that point. We didn't know he was a Muslim yet. He himself was still learning. It's not like he was a scholar. Everything that he spoke about was Islam 101. Very, very basic stuff. And he picked his spots that when it came up, he said it. But he lived a very, very beautiful lifestyle. Once it became known that he was a Muslim, we couldn't get enough to hear about what Islam was. And it was a matter, again, of just getting exposed to Islam. So, one of my best friends became a Muslim not too long after that. And my brother became Muslim, then my cousin became Muslim. Next thing you know, I'm in a car full of Muslims. And I had learned about Islam before that. And I thought to myself, my first 5 weeks as a university student was a philosophy class. For the first 5 weeks, it was about the concept of good and evil, and about heaven and hell. Right? And so for some of the parents who are here sending your kids to university, there's a lot of things that they're learning that you're not privy to. These conversations are going to happen, and they have to understand how we view these things as Muslims. So the first 5 weeks was actually about the concept of good and evil. And it's not the place to talk about it, but there were some very, very valid points that were made in that class that caused me to just question everything. And if I was a Muslim that didn't know anything, they were points that actually would go against what we view as Muslims to be good and evil too. And it can be very confusing. Long story short, I was simultaneously taking a class on world history, which was practically religion, and learned the basics of all the different religions: Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, animism, Confucianism, all these different things. And of all the religions, Islam was the only one that seemed like it had any truth to it. It's like, this is a very good religion, but I don't know any Muslims. That's what I remember thinking to myself. It's a neat religion, but I don't know any Muslims. It wasn't something that I was entertaining, like I want to be a Muslim. And then no sooner than I have that class, we meet that friend of ours, and like I said, I'm in a carload of Muslims now, mashallah. All of them telling me about how I need to accept Islam, right? So that is what I would say. If a person really wants to effectively give dawah, it's through practicing your own Islam, first and foremost. And then learning your basics so that you can connect. If you're asked, everyone should be able to give the ABCs of Islam. And I'm telling you, the Islam 101, the ABCs of Islam will blow people out of the water. They're things that people haven't heard before. Right? Am I right? Are you a new Muslim? Are you a convert?
Yes.
How long?
I started coming to the mosque in 2021, but this year, 2023, I've probably been here probably 10 times for this year.
Okay.
And just today I decided I want to become a Muslim. Because I take it very serious.
Alhamdulillah.
So now just today I decided I want to become a Muslim.
Alhamdulillah. Allah accept. Allah give you firmness and keep you firm. Alhamdulillah, that's a blessing.
I have something to say. So if it's not haram, I think music can bring a lot of people to Islam. Like a good music video, a good song that gives glory to Allah, and a music video that shows what Islam is about and being a Muslim is about, I think that would save the younger generation.
So the point made by this brother who you said you just became officially Muslim today?
I don't know if I'm ready to say I'm officially Muslim, but I'm officially committed to becoming Muslim.
All right, we'll talk about it over chicken shawarma downstairs after. But he was saying that he had something he wanted to share, which is that, he felt that music could be a good medium through reaching people with Islam, especially the youth, making a good music video and these type of things. Now, look, these are the type of things where there's going to be a lot of things that seem to make sense to us. I'm not addressing that point specifically. What we know as Muslims, Islam means submission. There are going to be things, and I tell this to anyone who's a new Muslim here, and a convert here, and even when you speak to converts, There are going to be things that you will end up learning about that don't seem to make perfect sense. Or it'll seem like we should do things like this, even though they're not done like that. That's the nature of how we were raised. Naturally, we're going to have certain biases and certain predispositions based on how we were socialized. But Islam is about submitting to the things which we can't always come to terms with or grasp. What does become important, that I would say, is to be connected to people that can help you along that way. So you're blessed to be, for example, in the masjid here tonight and have access to someone like Imam Azfar that you can connect with and that you can ask questions with and you can build with. But when it comes to learning our faith, we have to come with humility, with this idea that I need to learn, because to be completely honest, we don't have anything to offer to Islam. That could be very difficult for people to hear, but we have nothing to offer Islam, because Islam is already perfect. What we can do is hope that Allah uses us to be a means of showing Islam and spreading Islam the way it's supposed to. Any other questions? I'm not sure how long we're supposed to carry on until. 3 more minutes. Any other questions? Yeah.
So the messenger that's spoken about in the Quran, who is the messenger?
Who is the messenger spoken about in the Quran? So in the Quran, there's a lot of messengers spoken about.
Should I give an example?
Are you sticking around afterwards for the shawarma?
Yes.
We'll sit down and talk some more, inshallah.
Okay.
All right.
Inshallah.
Anyone else have any questions? Sister, yes? I'm sorry, I thought I saw a hand up. I can't see up there, just so you all know. So if you're raising your hand, just call out the question, because I can't hear, or I can't see up there, inshallah. Okay, if you'll allow me 2 minutes, I'm going to kind of zoom through. We're going to do like a rapid fire of some of the questions that I was hoping to get to that I didn't get to, inshallah. Oh, maybe I answered more than I realized, just kind of through our conversations. 1 second, please. What are important acts of worship to do during Ramadan? Connecting with the Quran. I would say put a focus on that. And then doing the extra prayers, the Taraweeh prayers. If you can come to the masjid for that, that's great. But also speaking as a convert, that was difficult. Right? So again, help people be where they're at. But connect to the Quran. The best example about new Muslims becoming better over time instead of just trying to become better the next day, like overnight. That's kind of what we spoke about, where you allow people, right, by building connections with them and helping them come along. And just remember, like, the Quran was revealed over 23 years. Right? The Quran didn't come entirely and then expect people to now embrace it in practice. It came over time. How to manage, this is the last one, we'll end with this inshallah. How to manage time with homework and Islamic life during Ramadan. So we know things get extra busy in Ramadan, and it might even be around close to finals and these type of things as people are preparing for studies. So how do you balance your time? Look, I would say this. When it comes to give and take, right? It's not homework or doing more in Ramadan. You know it's going to take the hit. If you really want to make time, MashaAllah, ahsan, Allah yada alayk. Social media. Right? People look at it like, man, I want to come to the masjid, I want to do more, it's Ramadan, but my school. It's not your school. It's not your school, it's the social media, it's the screen time, it's your Xbox, it's your PS4, it's your whatever it is that you're using. That is the thing that, if we're able to give that up, right? What do they call it now? What do they call these electronic fasts? Unplugging and these type of things. this is the perfect time to unplug. Right? This is the perfect time to unplug. I promise you, if you are stay off of TikTok for 1 month, you're not going to fall off the planet. You'll still be alive, inshallah. The sun will continue to rise. Right? It's difficult, I know. But if you really are about trying to make more time for your worship and your commitment to the deen, it's not your practice or school, it's your social media. That goes for all of us, adults too. Inshallah, Allah help us do that, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a blessed month of Ramadan for us. Allahumma barik lana fi Sha'ban wa ballighna Ramadan. May Allah bless us in this month of Sha'ban and the remaining maybe 2 weeks that we have in this month, and allow us to make it to the holy month of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be to observe that month with faith and piety and with prayer, and to be a source of forgiveness for all of our sins. Oh Allah, we ask you to guide all of us. We ask you to guide our families. Those of us who have mothers that are not Muslim here, guide their mothers. Those of us who have fathers that are not Muslim here, guide their fathers. Those of us who have any family members that have never mentioned your name, O Allah, give them guidance to mention your name with belief in your oneness. Guide our aunts and our uncles. Our nephews and our nieces. Our cousins and our friends. And our progeny until the last day, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah, allow us to be a support for one another. Allow us to be a sort of assisting each other in piety and taqwa. Allow us to have love for one another for your sake. Allow us to look past our shortcomings of one another. Allow us to put the illnesses of arrogance, racism, tribalism, any other type of ism that is stopping us from gaining nearness to you and gaining closeness to our brothers and our sisters, oh Allah, we ask you to remove that from our heart. And we ask you to help us become better, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allow us to have a Ramadan this year which will be better than the year before. And allow us to continue to make it, to become better, and that it becomes a source of change and improvement in our life even after Ramadan. To the point that we have a husnul khatima and leave this world in a state of goodness, Ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلى الله على النبي الأمي وبارك وسلم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين.
Takbir.
Allahu Akbar.
Sheikh Musa, before you head downstairs, if you guys are going to leave, make sure you meet and greet Sheikh Musa, as he did have more than a 5.5 hour drive last night, and he came in the morning. So please do meet him, thank him for coming all this way here to deliver both the khutbahs and this Friday night lecture. Next week, inshallah, we have a Ramadan conference, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You're more than welcome to join us for that. Various topics. Look out on the email and the WhatsApp for the list of speakers and the topics we are presenting on. And downstairs, we'll have chicken shawarma for about 45 minutes. And then you can leave. Go to sleep early so we can come provide you.